Okay, so this is an undefeated fighter list who got derailed on their first title shot. And I'm going to start with Paulo Costa, the Eraser. Paulo Costa, ever since he got to the UFC, he looked like a wrecking ball at middleweight. And the next big thing, and the guy that was going to catapult himself into the championship. He talked a lot of smack to Israel Adesanya, and he proclaimed himself as the next champion, that he was going to beat Izzy. A lot of trash talk in the lead up to the fight and the press conferences. To the first fight, he didn't even make it to the fight, and Izzy ended up fighting Joel Romero. And when they did fight, Israel Adesanya just blew through Paulo the Eraser Costa. And since then, Paulo Costa's MMA career has not been the same. He has gone on to lose to Marvin Vettori in a catchweight fight because he did not make weight. And Marvin Vettori, as we have seen, is not the top of the middleweights himself. Losing to Izzy himself, not winning a single round, and losing a bunch of other fights subsequently, like against Jared Cannonier, who brutalized him. And Paulo Costa at this time has, besides the Marvin Vettori fight, also lost to Robert Whittaker and now lost 49-46 to Sean Strickland. So what's next for Paulo Costa? I don't know. I think that a fight with Khamzat Chimaev would have been what I would have done, because that fight had already been booked, and Khamzat had not fought any middleweights except Usman and Gerald Merchart. And the Usman fight to me was a draw. So I don't know how that moved anything for Khamzat. So I would have liked to see this fight, Khamzat versus Paulo. Paulo's still like top 7, top 8 in the middleweight rankings, I believe. So I think this fight would have actually done something for both of them. Khamzat would have still needed to win another one, though, to get the title shot. But unfortunately, they went with Robert Whittaker. So there's not a lot of options for Paulo Costa. I believe he's getting paid good money for his fights. So it's got to be against a named opponent, maybe someone like Cannonier. But considering what Cannonier did to Marvin Vettori, who beat Paulo Costa, I think that actually would be very bad for Paulo Costa. And it looks like Paulo Costa's chances of becoming middleweight champion are essentially non-existent at this point. Going from an undefeated prospect who a lot of people thought, including himself, that he would be a champion, to a guy that right now is struggling to even be in the top 10. Darren the Gorilla Till. Darren Till was an undefeated prospect from England that was a surging contender in the UFC's welterweight division, and he rose through the rankings pretty quickly, tearing through UFC legend Donald Cerrone, defeating Wonderboy Thompson, even though it might have been controversial, in a striking classic fight. And when the face-offs came with then champion Tyron Woodley, Darren Till towered over the champion. And it was believed by many that Darren Till would become the next big thing and the next champion. Darren Till, however, went on to not land a single significant strike in his fight against Tyron Woodley. Tyron Woodley would catch him with his signature right hand which would knock him down. And after that, this would lead to a lot of vicious ground and pound by Tyron Woodley, who would end up submitting the Liverpool fighter in the second round. After that, Darren Till would main event in his hometown against Jorge Gamebred Masvidal in what would be an attempt to try to rise back up and get another shot at the UFC welterweight title. Darren Till was unfortunately knocked out cold this time on the second round as well. Darren Till decided to move up to middleweight, blaming the weight cuts as the reason for his back-to-back losses. He would then fight undersized Kelvin Gastelum and squeak out a decision that put a lot of hope in Darren Till and UK fans that Darren Till was back and that his reign of middleweight had begun. Darren Till would unfortunately then lose a 4-1 decision to Robert Whittaker, 49-46, and he would later be submitted by an aging, that some people will call washed up, Derek Bronson, and I believe the second round as well. Might have been the third, not sure. And after that, he fought then now champion Dricus du Plessis, who submitted him as well. And that has been the downfall of Darren the Gorilla Till. Francis the Predator Ngannou was the undefeated prospect against Stipe Miocic at UFC 220 in Boston, USA. And in his title shot winning fight against Alistair Overeem, he snapped his head so back that Joe Rogan said that he almost sent him to the moon, essentially lifting him up from the ground with a left uppercut that, as Joe Rogan said, almost sent him to the moon. And he was the next big thing, hailed by the UFC to hit harder than a Ford Escort. And then champion Stipe Miocic, who was tied in terms of UFC title defenses, was discarded as nothing more than the champion that was meant to lose to the next big thing. In the build up to this fight, Francis Ngannou said that he was going to catch Stipe with anything that he wanted, and that we know what would happen when he connects, or what happens when he connects. Francis Ngannou, as promised, went out there trying to take the head off UFC champion Stipe Miocic. And to Francis's surprise, Stipe Miocic dodged many of the shots with head movement and was able to take many of Francis's shots without going down, subsequently taking him down and even on the feet outstriking him in all 5 rounds. Francis Ngannou was handed his first UFC career in a very humbling fashion to a guy that was at least 20 pounds smaller than him. His ego was checked in this fight to the point that in his next fight, Francis Ngannou almost did not dare throw a strike against Derek Lewis. Granted, that also has to do with the power going back in his direction, because Derek Lewis has incredibly knockout power, and Francis Ngannou was aware of this himself, and he felt it himself. Francis Ngannou since then had an incredible resurgence where he went on a 4-fight win streak against Curtis Blades in Beijing, China, TKOing him, subsequently knocking out Cain Velasquez in 26 seconds, TKOing Junior Dos Santos, and knocking Jairzinho Rosenstruck out. That would lead the Cameroonian to fight the firefighter, UFC GOAT, heavyweight GOAT again. In the second outing, Francis Ngannou was successful in stopping Stipe's takedowns after his lessons learned from the first fight, and he was able to knock out Stipe Miocic and gain the UFC belt, subsequently defending against Cyril Gane in a close fight. And since then, he decided to go on to boxing. In boxing, he lost his first fight against Tyson Fury, who was the heavyweight champion, and he later lost his comeback fight against Anthony Joshua by brutal knockout, in which they gave Francis Ngannou oxygen, and he was folded in a very similar way that he folded Stipe on their second fight. Francis Ngannou is going to make his PFL debut in October 19, and that fight is going to have massive implications for Francis Ngannou, as we can right now say that his boxing career was a failure, and the outcome of this fight is going to say a lot about Francis Ngannou's decision to leave the UFC. If he goes out there and becomes a PFL champion, multi-promotion champion, that's going to be a great thing. However, if he goes out there and loses to Renan Ferreira, especially by knockout, then everyone's going to have the ability to say that it was a bad decision. Having lost the John Jones fight to then going to getting knocked out in both boxing and PFL, which is believed to be the lesser promotion of the two. So that fight for Francis Ngannou has a lot of implications, and we can only wait to see what the outcome of those fights will be. Francis Ngannou has also expressed interest in going back to boxing, and he mentioned a fight with Deontay Wilder as a possibility. So we will see what is next for the Predator, Francis Ngannou. Like and subscribe.